100% sure that Richard Hoffman, your grandpa, was the Zodiac.
I'm not 99.9 no more, I'm 100%.
Zodiac, a symbol that now stands for terror.
One of America's most notorious serial killers.
The Zodiac. Zodiac.
Leaving clues, sending letters directly to the police and news stations. And for nearly 50 years, no one has come close to figuring out who the Zodiac killer was. Every few years, some new evidence or suspects would appear, but there was never enough evidence to prove it. But this time, seems different. A man named J Foy posted a series of TikToks.
My grandpa is the mother Zodiac killer. It looks exactly like my grandpa. Grandpa was a Vallejo police officer. That was the word until wrong.
So I'm gonna meet up with him to see how much evidence he
snitching on his own grandpa, grandson.
He has on his grandfather, and to see if after 56 years, we might finally have the identity of the Zodiac killer. In order to talk to Jay and
now imagine that is not the killer. You putting a bad rep on your dead grandpa's name.
Understand his evidence, we first had to understand the details of the Zodiac story. So I went to where it all began.
This was the exact site of the first murder of David and Betty.
The double homicide that took place out on a county road sometime after 11 o'clock.
Car pulls up on this road. It's a couple, David and Betty. They're just doing what couples do, having a good time. He, I guess, was following them for quite a while. He pulls up beside them, and then he shoots them both. It's terrible. What's insane to me is they have the actual crime scene photos. I don't know how well it will match up. Evidence we got from this, which will be important later, is it was a couple, man and woman. It was a gun used. The ammo was Super X, which is important.
And as for the location itself, there's the Zodiac symbol, which just looks like a scope, all over the place. I also found some bullets, which was mildly concerning, but I just ignored that. And then I found a lot more Zodiac symbols.
Signed this one, I don't know what it was written with because they could not get that off. And then above, you also have a smiley face, which that's the type of stuff that I like to see. It's a lot better, more positive.
This isn't really where the Zodiac name started though, because he didn't write any letters or anything until after the next murder, which was only 3 miles down the road.
This is the one where they pulled out on a gravel road. It doesn't look anything like that though. And this is the park right here. It's honestly a really nice park. You can see from the overhead shot, it happened up here and to the left. Man, that kid is screaming so loud. They think the Zodiac killer killed 37 people, only 5 are confirmed. So couple pulls in here, Darlene and Mike. Darlene, she was known as, how do I say this in a not bad way? She was with some dude that wasn't her husband. She was also married at the time. Car comes around, he parks like the police, it seems like it's officer. He comes around with a light, attempts to kill both of them. Darlene dies, and then Mike doesn't. He survives, which is kind of important for finding out who the Zodiac killer is. The guy we're meeting up with later, Jay, he has information on this exact thing from the actual police cases. He's also talked to Mike, the guy that survived, and it's mind-blowing stuff. So this all happened on July 4th, which is also something to take note of. Apparently on this one, he literally straight up called the police and admitted to this one.
So around a month later, the Zodiac basically was born, because this was the first letters he sent, and ciphers.
How does one man survive a murder, attempted murder at that, and you don't recognize his face or get a perspective of what he looks like?
He sent them to the San Francisco Chronicle,
that's sus.
Vallejo Times, and the Examiner.
That's sus.
Message. He lists the brand name of the ammo, Super X. He names how many shots were fired, where they were fired, how the people were positioned, what they were wearing.
He basically confirmed that he did it, but in addition to that, he left ciphers and told the news stations to put it in the paper or else he would kill a lot more people. Basically the real life Riddler. And this first cipher was eventually solved by a random couple, and it basically said that the Zodiac believed that all the people he killed would be his slaves in the afterlife. This didn't really help us figure out if the Zodiac killer was Hoffman, but some details at the next location definitely would.
So you think he was like picking people who he wants to be his slave? I don't even think so. I don't know if that was just like I almost feel like he was trolling. Like I don't think he believed that. Yeah, you think if that's like your whole philosophy behind killing people, well, one, you wouldn't even really be telling people, would you? We have arrived, kind of. It's a little down.
This looks like Red Dead Redemption.
Napa Police Department. I want to report a murder. A double murder. They're 2 miles north of parking headquarters. They were in a white Volkswagen Carpet. I'm the one that did it.
This is where it happened, just down here.
What the f? Bro, he was calling the police telling him he did it?
So I think they were laying like right here. Cecilia Shepard and Brian Hartnett. This one was like, if you watch the movie, I don't even want to describe it on YouTube because it's so brutal. Like, it was literally, it is hard to watch. And the guy survived.
Brian made it for two reasons. Some people might regard
another
as
survivor,
intangibles, a strong faith and an equally strong will to live.
I did think I was going to die. From that moment on, one has to have certain goals that you have to set. The first goal, of course, was to live.
Prayers out to that guy. This was the only one he ever did with a knife, which is very odd. It almost seemed like he was just doing stuff, like everything he was doing was to throw people off. The other important thing about this location and to finding out who the Zodiac Killer is this was the first time he was seen in a costume. The costume that the Zodiac wore was described as an executioner's hood with a symbol. He wrote on their car, on the car of the people he killed, his symbol, Vallejo, the date, which was 12/20/68, very close to Christmas. It seemed like he really liked to do stuff around holidays. He sends literally so many.
So little, that's killing a before the holidays, like, bro, that's like the time you're supposed to be like happy, bro.
Ciphers. There's a ton. I'll go over those a little bit later, but man, I get so off track easily. I have ADHD. I'm really sorry. What was I just saying? I don't know. I'm really interested in like the psychology of why these people were doing it. Like what was going through their mind. It's just like, it doesn't make sense.
We were starting to see some patterns emerge that would be connected to Richard, but there was still a lot to the fourth official murder.
So we have driven about 2 hours to the next spot. Oh, all right. So first we need to find out where exactly it was, because it's the corner of these two streets, but as you notice, there's 4 different corners. It's one of the corners. We don't know which one. Oh, is that literally the one we're on? Because this is 3898. So they know this.
So it's all in the same area.
For a lot of reasons. So what happened? Cab pulled up here, literally right in front of this house.
San Francisco Police Department.
Yep, there's a fight in a cab.
What is your location?
3390 at Washington.
I believe that was the exact window they saw it out of. I don't know how accurate that is once again. But yeah, literally like that's the view. They would have saw it from right there. I mean, that's pretty close. And then the top part, police drive by him. They drive by him. They see the Zodiac Killer. But you know what description they were looking for? A black dude.
And that's where they fucked up.
Man, they were so close to catching him. It's like actually.
That's where they fucked up. Imagine there was a black dude just standing there. They would have just arrested that and called him the Zodiac Killer. Like, that's crazy, bro.
Actually frustrating. He took some of the guy's cloth and like that had blood stains on it from the victim. He sent it to the police. The interesting thing was in the car he left gloves, but there were no fingerprints. And later they found out that was because he covered his fingerprints with like a wood cement, which never really lined up with any of the victims, but it does line up with the guy we're gonna talk to later.
What the f? Put cement on his hands?
Which is crazy.
This guy was dedicated.
There's really only one other important murder, but it was never 100% confirmed that it was the Zodiac. This was the murder of Sherry Bates, which would have been basically way before all the other murders in October 1966. People think this is the Zodiac because there was a poetic letter about the murder found carved into a desk where it all happened, which takes us to the suspects. I'm going to go over these extremely quick just because they've been looked into so much, and I want to get to the newest evidence, obviously. If you want me to look more into them later down the line, let me know. Arthur Lee Allen. Apparently, Darlene was connected with someone with the nickname Lee, which was his middle name. Weirdest thing, he was at the lake the day of the murder and had knives covered in blood, but he claimed it was to kill a chicken. That seems like the most basic excuse.
I'm not the Zodiac Killer.
His friend claimed that Arthur told him the entire plan to become the Zodiac in detail before it all happened, which is just, this guy looked like as sus as you can look. Richard Gajkowski. His co-worker sent letters to the police that he believed he was the Zodiac, and then Nancy Solver, which was a dispatcher who received one of the Zodiac Killer's calls, thought his voice matched very well.
He said, I want to report a double murder. I shot them with a 9mm Luger, and I also killed those kids last year. And his closing was, goodbye,
Earl. His son wrote a book claiming that he was the Zodiac, which is kind of crazy. He matched the sketch, was also interested in codes and ciphers. Lawrence. Earlier in his life, he had gotten into a car accident and had trouble finding gratification after. His nickname Kane can be seen in one of the ciphers, and Darlene's sister claimed that Kane harassed Darlene in the weeks leading up to her murder. There's probably a good like 10 more new suspects, that appeared in the 55 years since then, but none of them were convicted either, so now it's finally time to meet up with Jay and to see once and for all if Richard Hoffman, his grandfather, could be the Zodiac killer.
Where is Richard Hoffman is the question.
I was really curious, and we actually asked you this earlier, but how you kind of figured that out and got into this story.
Right, so I have a history in law enforcement. I was a cop for 10 years, and I ended up going to a fallen officer's memorial, and I was thinking to myself, like, why was I the only member of my family who was a police officer? And then as I was walking home from this memorial, I remembered that I had a grandpa that I wasn't close to after a certain age.
And it's the fact that if the Zodiac killer was a killer, it would make sense that he's a cop and he hasn't got caught, because back then, bro, dude, their power was insane. I bet, like, they got away with dumb murders, bro.
That was Vallejo Police Department, which we happen to be standing in front of.
Right here.
So I went on Google and typed in Richard Hoffman, Vallejo Police Department. I was going through some of the news articles about him being shot and him getting promoted to detective. I was really happy. And then next thing you know, I see a link that says Zodiac Killer Richard Hoffman, and I was just shocked. I couldn't stop digging. I stayed up all night. I didn't sleep. On other threads, other websites, Reddit's, Tapatalk, and I was convinced after like 13 hours of doing investigation, I was like, it was
and no technology.
So you put multiple pictures, I'll put them on screen, and it does look shockingly similar to the description.
In regards to Richard wearing glasses, he had an astigma his whole life, and they wouldn't wear glasses because the flashes and the technology wasn't good enough. And you can see him, he's a detective here in Vallejo.
I was working as a patrol officer in the...
When he got promoted, he changed his whole entire look. You could see in all his older photos, he's wearing the glasses. So growing up, what I remember before my father got custody of me, we would spend the holidays at my grandpa's house. He loved the holidays. Halloween, Christmas, Easter's, that was my grandpa's thing, which is ironic because a lot of the Zodiac's killings were around major holidays.
Imagine like you pull to your grandpa's house, you go in his basement and you just see the Zodiac outfit just hanging on the wall, bro. And then he opens the door and he's like, so, what are you doing, son? What are you doing? You're just like scared as f***. You're like, you're the Zodiac killer.
All I remember from my
like that happens in a
being
movie.
really authoritarian. Like I'm talking about Germany, and my grandpa was really big into German history. He didn't respect women. He called my grandma girl instead of hey babe, hey wife. Any women in our family he referred to as that girl. Always felt superior to women. Things didn't go his way, getting loud, slamming cabinets.
I know there was a lot with like handwriting, with the way he spelt things, with that stuff. So could you go over that a little bit?
Then I noticed a lot of the words that the Zodiac was misspelling were the same things my grandpa was misspelling in his actual police reports that are on record. Like leaving the E on words like casings instead of dropping the E.
And you said like a double L.
And the double L, so they had the same linguistic errors, very poetic. Like my grandpa's police reports weren't just like police reports, it sounded like a poem, and it's in the same tone that the Zodiac would write his letters. He was really bad at spelling.
That's like actually insane. It's just like, if he is the killer.
And hated crossword puzzles. So he found a knack for math. Like he loved solving math problems and equations, and that's why he became a woodworker. He has a lot of numbers, and you could correlate that to the ciphers that the Zodiac was doing. Because he was so bad at spelling, he used a different way to speak to us.
And I originally thought these ciphers were more like puzzles, but they were straight up just like really complicated math equations, as you can see right here.
And then also we talked about this earlier, talking about the woodworking, how they couldn't find his fingerprints because he covered it with a cement.
Yeah, like a wood cement or a wood adhesive, which is really rare. And my grandpa was a woodworker. Yeah, so someone who's usually handling those type of supplies and substances, they know in their head, and if you're a cop, you know that fingerprints are a big part of a crime scene. Like, can you imagine a serial killer writing the reports for these murders? He was actually on set of the 2007 film The Zodiac as a law enforcement consultant, pulling up.
What? What? Can you imagine this behind the scenes just laughing at them acting the movie out? He's like, oh, PTSD. The good memories, bringing it back to the good old days. He's telling people on the set, he's like, wait, no, that's not how it went down. You guys are doing it all wrong.
He was the one saying, "Oh no, this." Hoffman.
Then we got to the most compelling evidence.
And it was initialed RH, which is.
Yo, his grandpa's the Zodiac killer. Dog, I thought this was just doing this for clout. Yo, his grandpa might actually be the Zodiac killer.
Richard Hoffman.
Then we got to the most compelling evidence.
Where is he though? Is the real question. If he's dead, can't you dig him up from his grave and use his ID, or use his DNA?
And the way he like pulled up behind him, you guys watched the movie.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't even like right behind him. It was like the same way. Police vehicle and plain clothes, which is another reason that he probably was doing it that night, because he was on like plain clothes duty. He didn't render aid, he didn't call an ambulance, he pulled out a piece of chalk to outline Mike's body. Richard admitted to moving the body. He admitted to not doing CPR, moving Mike's body. He admitting to going through Mike's wallet. My grandpa's DNA is all over the scene. So no longer are we saying, oh, that's the Zodiac's DNA. We're saying, oh, that's the cop that arrived first. Of course his DNA is there. He pushed officers off the scene that arrived with him and said, no, I got it. In what right mind is there a possible double murder where you're sending?
Yeah, you can't even, it's because times were different back then. This really got away with that.
Back up. That scene with Darlene and Mike and her painting party, her circle of friends were into drugs, like psychedelics. And why would Richard claim being at that painting party if there's like a bunch of drugs there? No cop, even Buzz, his partner, no cop is gonna claim being at a party, right? So they all try to distance themselves, and they all had their little secrets on the inside, and that's why everyone was hush-hush about it.
And I think the craziest thing, because we talked before, the craziest thing you mentioned was, Darlene had mentioned that it was Richard.
Right.
That's all she said about it. He just does. She never mentioned his name, but she said something about Richard. His name was Richard. I kept hearing the name Richard. And I think that was his name. She referred to him as Richard.
Oh, yeah, bro. His grandfather is literally the... Yeah, this is too much, evidence, bro. This is, actually, condemned.
you'd be scared to rat out. That's, I mean, a cop.
Do you think a lot of officers knew or...
Yeah, that's true, bro. Like, if he wasn't a cop, they probably would have snitched. Because, like, bro, there's no way you get away with that many murders and not have somewhat of authority or be a higher up.
Had suspicions?
Of Richard, yeah, I think that they all were, because back then, as we spoke about, it was easier to get away with things, and I feel like they did have a good old boys club going on, which is why Buzz Gordon, the officer that arrived with Richard, they ended up getting into a fist fight like a week before the murder of Darlene, and Buzz was on his
What if they were like all in on it and it wasn't just one killer? What if it was just like a group of cops, you know?
way out. Vallejo was trying to fire him for sleeping with underage girls.
There were also a couple of officers who were fired over a relationship with a 14-year-old girl.
One of those officers was questioned about his relationship with Darlene.
And Richard showed up and beat up Buzz. Richard ended up getting handcuffed, and he told Buzz, he's like, I'm gonna get you back. 4 days later, Darlene dies. And Buzz had an open relationship with Darlene. So I think they all had
What the
secrets. And if you tell this one little one, then it's gonna
Wait, so the 4-year-old that got sexually harassed got killed?
expose everybody else's secrets. That's why everyone asked, well, why did he just all of a sudden stop? Well, if you look at the timeline of events, the Zodiac wrote like a final goodbye letter in 1974, which was around the time my grandpa was getting promoted to detective. So now he's in this big chair with this throne in his own cute little office. He changed his look, he grew his mustache out, he divorced my grandma, found a new younger wife. So all these big changes were happening for him, and I think that's where he drew that validation from, was his new chapter, where he didn't need to do those things no more because there was so much more going on. Like, that was it for him.
Do you think that the killing was driven by that narcissism, or do you think it was like some weird, I don't even know what to call it, where it was like the one cipher that was revealed that was like collecting slaves for the afterlife?
I think what drove his murders were control. Man to woman. If you notice, most of the men that he assaulted survived, except the cab driver he shot in the back of the head. And that he took it all out on the women that were with those men. So
And Richard didn't like women.
I think what drove him was feeling in control of those
Maybe that was gay.
young, vulnerable women.
Why do you think Richard has ever been like really looked into?
I think a lot of people dismiss it because the timeline that he created was skewed. They said he was at the hospital and announced Darlene's death at 12:40. And I think that instantly says there's no way he could have made the phone call from the payphone across from Vallejo Police Department when the phone call came in. There's two, but I think they're forgetting that Richard made that timeline. Richard wrote that report.
Yeah, that makes everything so much harder.
But as days went on, I have found the craziest evidence that I can't even believe that it's a connection. And I'll give you a little hint. It has to do with the one time that he wore a costume. A couple of the victims that I'm talking to, or the victims that passed away, some of their families have reached out to me and they're sharing decades of information that they have stocked up in their files, digging into my grandpa's military record and all that stuff. So I got a couple sources, and then even people who were reporters here in Solano County back in the 70s, they lost their jobs, but they have a whole storage unit with evidence pointing towards Richard.
Yeah, bro,
when I
that's
tell you,
crazy.
it's so
Will they still even be able to find out, though, that if he was the killer or not, since he died?
compelling that I want everyone to feel what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
Like, without a shadow of a doubt, there's no ifs, ands, or buts. It was Richard Hoffman. And I know that. With everything that I already gathered and the dots I've already connected, I'm not 99.9 no more, I'm 100%.
Wow.
Yeah, we're gonna solve it.
Oh, yeah.
This is gonna be solved. And how many people are left without closure that have been looking for it for years? And they're on their way out, you know what I mean? Some of these people are 70 years old, 75. If this could be their final check in the box where they're like, thank you for what you did. I did
It's such a good goal. Thank you again for coming.
That's crazy.
Yeah, massive stuff planned. Go follow him. J Foy on everything, I guess.
J Foy _ 3.0. Yep.
Well, after checking the facts, everything he said made sense. He had actual evidence for a lot of it, and it was very compelling. I don't think everything we talked about is 100% enough to prove it, but I kind of do think that he has some stuff that might be.
Insane. Pretty crazy if you ask me, my nigga.
Relax, bird, been out then, this is a jet, nigga. 5-star dinners, 5 stars on my bitch, nigga. Been 10 fat shit up on my wrist, been him, could've been anything I wanna get, nigga.